I never thought my daughter would see me as just a wallet, and so unapologetically. That Wednesday morning, my hands were still shaking at the kitchen table from the last phone call with my boss. 30 years at the company, and now a severance package and a polite best of luck were all they had for me. I thought I had braced myself for that blow. Nothing in this world, though, could have prepared me for what came next. As I was folding the last of my office blouses, trying to keep my mind busy, April stormed in. Her high heels clicked against the tiles like gunshots. Before I could even open my mouth, she threw her words at me. "Now you're useless. Get out, parasite. You have a week to pack up and go. I can't look after you anymore." The sharp words echoed, slicing right through my ribs. My heart stumbled. I looked up at her. My girl, my baby, the one whose hair I used to braid for ballet recitals. All I saw was contempt. She stood there face flushed, her phone in hand, not even waiting for me to answer. She was already turning away, her voice rising as she called a friend. I finally did it. I kicked her out. She was just dead weight anyway. The floor tilted under me. My knees buckled, but I caught myself on the table's edge. All those years, I gave her $1,000 every week, no questions asked. When she said she needed new shoes, a mental health weekend, or rent money for her artistic apartment, I handed it over. Because that's what mothers do, right? We give, and we tell ourselves love will come back in the quiet hours. But that morning, there was no quiet hour. Just her laughter echoing down the hall, mixed with my shallow breaths. I wanted to ask what part of me she thought was so disposable. The part that stayed up with her through teenage heartbreaks, or the part that worked overtime so she could have a Christmas gift to unwrap. But my mouth wouldn't move, my tongue heavy, pinned by the weight of betrayal. I looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen where she had learned to bake cookies with me, where we danced in our socks to old Whitney Houston songs, and now she called me a parasite? Something inside me shattered so quietly I almost missed it, like a thin porcelain dish dropped in the next room. You know it's broken, even if no one else hears it. She slammed the front door as she left, leaving behind the echo of her last words and a trail of cheap perfume. I stood there alone, my hand still gripping the chair. The house felt too big, the air too heavy. I pressed my palm to my chest as if I could hold my heart together from the outside. That was the moment it all changed. When I finally understood, love without respect is nothing but a leash, and I had been wearing it for too long. I didn't scream. I didn't chase after her. I just stood there, feeling the betrayal seep into my bones. Then I took a deep, long, painful breath and knew what I had to do next. She was gone. The echo of her words still clung to the walls, sticky and sharp. I moved to the sink, turning on the tap, watching the water run over my trembling hands. I tried to wash her voice off me, but it clung like oil. I walked to my bedroom, each step feeling like dragging a sack of wet cement. The family photos lining the hallway, April's graduation, her first dance, the messy cake we made on her 9th birthday. Each one was a little stab to the chest. All proof of the woman I thought I'd raised, the woman I thought loved me. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the small artifacts of my life. The knitted blanket I made one winter when the heating broke, the little ceramic tray where I kept my wedding ring even after he died, the lamp April helped me pick out at that flea market. I thought she loved that day. I thought she loved me. Her voice echoed in my head again and again. "Now you're useless. Get out, parasite." The word parasite felt like acid on my skin. I pulled open my nightstand drawer and took out my old checkbook. The pages were thin from overuse.
the edges frayed from years of signing away pieces of myself. $1,000 every week, no questions, no receipts, just the quiet hope that it would keep her close. I pressed my fingers into the page, feeling the indentations of my own handwriting. All those signatures, each one a silent prayer. For the first time, I saw the truth so clearly it almost blinded me. She hadn't loved me. She loved what I gave her. The money, the security, the unending patience, the mother who never said no. I looked around and saw my life with new eyes. It wasn't a home. It was a museum of sacrifices no one had asked me to make. A monument to a woman who thought love meant emptying her pockets and swallowing her pain. The next morning, I forced myself to get dressed, not for her, but for me. I pulled on my old blue cardigan, the one she always said made me look grandmotherly, as if that was some kind of insult. I tied my hair back, smoothed the wrinkles in my skirt, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked hollow, but under the hollowness was something sharp. I walked to the hallway closet, digging through old boxes labeled taxes, receipts, mementos. My hands moved on their own, guided by some quiet instinct I didn't know I had. At the very bottom, under a stack of old utility bills, I found the thin manila envelope I tucked away after Robert died. My late husband was cautious, meticulous. He'd insisted on keeping every legal document in triplicate, just in case. My fingers trembled as I slid the papers out. There it was, the house deed. My name, only my name. I stared at it so long my vision blurred. All these years I had forgotten. Robert had insisted it stay in my name after he passed. So no one could ever take your roof from you, he said, cupping my face with those big work-worn hands. My throat closed up at the memory. I could almost feel his calloused thumb brushing my cheek, hear his voice telling me I was stronger than I knew. April never knew. She must have just assumed the house would be hers, like everything else she claimed without a second thought. I pressed the paper to my chest. It felt like a shield, warm and solid against my ribs. In the living room, morning light spilled across the floor, turning the dusty air into gold. For a moment, I felt like I could breathe again. I looked at the framed photo of Robert on the mantel. He was smiling, his eyes crinkling in that quiet, patient way. I remember how he'd always stand in the kitchen doorway after work, waiting to greet me first, before anyone else. My lip quivered, but I didn't cry. Not today. I sat down at the table, unfolded the deed, and smoothed it out like a map to freedom. April thought she had thrown me out, but she had no idea she was the one living on borrowed ground. I traced my name on that paper over and over, as if I was learning it for the first time. A flicker of resolution, almost electric, moved through my veins. This wasn't just the house. It was my last gift from a man who truly loved me, who saw me as more than a wallet or a caretaker. For the first time in decades, I wasn't a bank, a backup plan, or a crutch. I was the owner. And suddenly, for the first time since she screamed at me, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel disposable. I felt powerful. I folded the deed carefully, placed it in my purse like a weapon, and whispered to the empty room, "You forgot whose house this really is." Then I stood up, my knees steady, and took my first real breath in years.
I walked out into the morning air with the deed in my purse. My heart thudded like it used to before a job interview. Afraid, but alive. I didn't tell April I was leaving. She probably thought I was at the grocery store or crying somewhere in a corner, easy to ignore. Instead, I took the bus 2 stops down to that little cafe with the chipped blue paint, the one Robert used to take me to on our anniversaries. The place smelled like burnt espresso and old wood. Comforting. Familiar. Helen was already there, sitting in the back corner, absent-mindedly stirring her coffee. We'd been friends since college. We lost touch for years, but after Robert died, She showed up at my door with a casserole and never left my side. When she saw me walk in, her eyes softened. She stood and wrapped me in a hug that smelt like lavender lotion and kitchen soap. "What happened?" she whispered into my hair. I pulled the deed from my purse and set it on the table between us. It felt like laying down a winning hand in a game I didn't even know I'd been playing. Helen leaned forward, squinting, her lawyer instincts kicking in even after retirement. As she read, her mouth slowly curled into a knowing smile. "She doesn't know," she said, her voice low and almost giddy with disbelief. I shook my head, fighting the urge to laugh or cry. Helen closed the folder gently, pressing her hand on top of mine. "She thinks she can throw you out because she's been living off your kindness. But kindness isn't the same as weakness, Myrtle." My eyes burned, but no tears fell. I squeezed her hand so tightly my knuckles turned white. "She called me a parasite," I said, my voice cracking just once. Helen flinched, her jaw tightening. "And now she'll learn who was really feeding off whom." The cafe hummed with quiet chatter, the clink of spoons against porcelain. A young couple nearby giggled over their pastries, completely unaware of the small revolution unfolding at our table. I sipped my coffee, feeling the bitter warmth spread through my chest like armor. "You have options," Helen said, her voice steady and calm. "We can secure the title, change the locks, start legal proceedings if she refuses to leave. You don't have to run. You don't have to give her another cent." A small, trembling breath escaped me, half relief, half terror. I wasn't used to hearing I had options. I was used to solving everyone else's problems, patching holes, writing checks. But now I had a path. Helen leaned in, her eyes fierce. "Let her believe she's won just for a moment longer. Then we take back what's yours." I felt my shoulders straighten for the first time in weeks. I picked up the deed again, feeling its weight, and tucked it carefully back into my purse. For the first time since that morning in the kitchen, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was planning. And as Helen's hand closed around mine again, I realized I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The next day, I found myself in Carol's rose-filled garden. She always said the flowers listened better than most people, and I think she was right. I sat on her old wicker chair, the one that creaked with every shift, and I finally let the words spill out. All of it. The 1,000 a week, April's screaming, the name she called me, the way the house had turned from a sanctuary into a trap. Carol listened, her weathered hands resting on her tea mug. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer cheap comfort, just watched me, her eyes soft but sharp, like she was watching a delicate bird learn to fly again. When I finally stopped talking, the air between us felt heavy, electric. Carol took a long sip of her tea, set it down carefully on the table, and reached over to squeeze my fingers. "Oh, Myrtle," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. That girl never understood love. She only understood leverage. I opened my mouth to argue, to defend April, but nothing came out, because Carol was right. I looked around her garden at the bright red roses climbing the fence, the lavender swaying in the breeze. Every plant here was rooted, solid, claiming its space. I realized how long I had been shrinking myself to fit into April's ever-narrowing expectations of me. "You have more power than you think," Carol continued. "You always did. You just kept giving it away, piece by piece, hoping she'd give you love in return." The truth hit me like a slap. My lips parted, and for a moment I almost couldn't breathe. But then I did. a shaky, hard inhale that felt like the first real breath in years. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered. Carol's laugh rang out, startling the sparrows on the fence. "Oh, Myrtle, you've already done the hardest part. You saw her for who she is. The rest, that's just logistics." She stood, moving with a grace that belied her 78 years old, and disappeared into her kitchen. When she returned, she set a small tin box in front of me, her old sewing kit. Every tear, every button popped, every loose hem. "You fixed it all, didn't you? You stitched everyone back together," she said, tapping the tin. "It's time to stitch yourself back now." I ran my fingers over the worn lid, feeling the grooves where her fingers had pressed 1,000 times. "I can't promise it won't hurt," she said softly, "but I can promise you this. The loneliness of standing up for yourself is nothing compared to the loneliness of being used." I sat there in her garden long after she went back inside, the sun dipping lower, the shadows growing longer. When I finally stood, I felt taller somehow, as if my spine had found its natural length again. I turned to the roses, the stubborn, thorny things, and I almost laughed. "You've had it right all along," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. "You grow sharp so you can keep blooming." I left Carol's that evening with her sewing kit tucked under my arm and something new stitched into my chest. Resolve. Let April think she'd won. Let her laugh and throw her parties. She'd soon learn that this parasite still had roots she didn't know about and thorns she wasn't ready to feel. When I got home, the house was lit up like a stage set. Music thumped through the walls, some bass-heavy party playlist April always played when she wanted to feel important. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the muffled laughter, the shrieks of her friends. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed up waiting for her to come home safely, pacing the living room with the porch light on. Now she celebrated my absence before I had even fully left. I stepped inside quietly. No one noticed me. I watched her through the kitchen doorway, her head thrown back, drink in hand, her boyfriend's arm snaked around her waist. Her friends sprawled across my couch, their shoes on the coffee table I once polished every Saturday morning. She saw me in the corner of her eye, but turned back to her guests without a flicker of recognition. I might as well have been the ghost she already imagined me to be. I slipped past them, moving up the stairs. My heart pounded so loud I thought they might hear it over the music. In my room, I closed the door softly and sat at my desk. I pulled the deed from my purse, unfolded it carefully, and smoothed it on the wooden surface. I opened my laptop and logged into my email. Started drafting the message to the locksmith, my fingers trembling but precise. Then another to Helen, outlining the steps to change the locks and file the eviction notice. The words flowed out of me like water after a drought. Unstoppable. Necessary. I paused to listen. April's voice drifted up the stairs, sharp and triumphant. "Finally free of that old woman. Can you believe she's just hiding away upstairs like a pathetic little mouse? I gave her a week to get out." A hot wave of shame rushed over me. But then I looked down at the paper under my hand, the one with my name, my power spelled out so clearly. I felt the shame evaporate, replaced by a thin, fierce line of calm running through my chest. I started packing my things, slowly, deliberately. The essentials first, my documents, my small jewelry box, the photo of Robert and me on our wedding day, young, naive, so full of plans we didn't even know we had. When I zipped my suitcase shut, I sat on the edge of the bed. My heart was still racing, but there was no fear in it now, only the rhythm of a decision made. Before I left the room, I turned to look around one last time. The flower curtains April always complained about, my reading lamp, the quilt I had stitched in the weeks after Robert died to keep my hands from shaking. It all felt like mine again, even if just for this moment. As I stepped out, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My shoulders looked higher, my chin lifted. I didn't look like a parasite. I looked like a woman reclaiming her space, stitch by stitch. I moved down the stairs slowly, past April's laughter and the clinking glasses. None of them looked up. At the door, my hand on the knob, I paused and whispered to myself, so low only the walls heard. You only miss me now that I said no. Then I stepped into the night, the cool air wrapping around me like a blessing. While they partied inside the house they thought they owned, I walked away, not defeated, but loaded with the quietest, sharpest kind of power. 3 days later, I came back to gather the last of my things. April stood on the front porch, waiting for me, her arms crossed, eyes sharp as knives. Before I even stepped inside, she shoved a crumpled trash bag into my hands. "Don't forget this on your way out," she snapped, her voice ringing out across the yard. I looked down at the bag. My old cardigans, a few kitchen utensils, a teacup Robert gave me for our 10th anniversary, all carelessly stuffed together like yard waste. I felt my knees wobble, but forced them steady, my fingers digging into the plastic. I didn't say a word. Behind her, I saw the neighbors peeking from their windows, curtains twitching. I heard her raise her voice, announcing my exit to anyone within earshot. "She's leaving because she can't handle life on her own. She's mentally unfit, needs constant hand-holding." The words crashed over me, each one another tiny stab. I remembered the years I drove her to auditions, the nights I sat up with her through heartbreaks, the endless weekends I spent balancing my own work just to pay for her emergencies. I remembered every whispered promise she'd made, that she'd take care of me someday, that I'd always have a place with her. And now here she was, rewriting the story, painting me as the burden, the failure. My chest felt hollow, like the wind could blow straight through me. But I tightened my grip on that bag. I turned without a word and walked to my car, each step loud in my head like a funeral drum. I felt the neighbors' eyes on my back, their pity crawling up my spine. When I reached the car, I stood there for a moment, unable to move. My breath came shallow, and my fingers shook so badly I almost dropped the keys. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn back and shout every truth I'd swallowed for decades. But I didn't. Instead, I opened the trunk, set the bag inside, and closed it softly, like I was tucking away the last piece of a life that had already died. As I slid into the driver's seat, I saw April in the rearview mirror, laughing now, her head thrown back, triumphant and unbothered. A small voice inside me whispered, "Let her laugh. Let her think she's won." I started the engine, my hand surprisingly steady now. As I pulled away, I felt the house grow smaller and smaller in the mirror, a shrinking monument to all my quiet sacrifices.
By the time I turned the corner, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't crying. There was a tightness in my throat, a burn behind my eyes, but no tears. Instead, beneath the hurt, beneath the humiliation, something else moved. A quiet, seething resolve. The final blow had landed, and now I was free to swing back. That night, I stayed in Carol's guest room, a small, sun-faded space that smelled faintly of lavender and old books. The bed was firmer than mine, the quilt too heavy, but I didn't mind. As I lay there in the dark, I replayed every word April had thrown at me: useless, parasite, mentally unfit. They rattled around in my head like marbles in an empty jar. I turned to face the window. The moonlight spilled across the floor in soft, trembling lines. My fingers curled around the edge of the blanket, my knuckles white. I heard Carol moving around in the kitchen and knew her presence would make my breathing slow down a little bit. I thought about the house, the roses Robert planted, the quiet mornings I spent reading by the kitchen window, the door frames where April's height was marked in pencil year after year. Those memories twisted inside me, sweet at first, then sharp, because behind every soft moment was the quiet erosion of my own worth. I'd been chipping away at myself for so long, I hadn't noticed there was almost nothing left. At dawn, my feet hit the floor before the alarm clock could even buzz. There was no hesitation this time, no lingering in bed, no wavering at the bathroom mirror. I pulled on a simple gray sweater, my most comfortable shoes, and pinned my hair back neatly. I looked like a quiet old woman on her way to church meeting, and maybe that's what they always wanted me to be. Carol handed me a mug of coffee, her eyes sharp and watchful. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded, but my hands betrayed me, trembling as I lifted the mug. She covered them with her own, pressing them still. "This is the hardest part, Myrtle. After this, you'll be unstoppable." I forced a thin smile. "I'm tired of surviving in pieces," I said. The words surprised me. They tasted metal, sharp and final. We drove in silence to the county office. My breath caught in my chest when I saw the glass doors. I hadn't stepped foot in there since Robert died. Helen was waiting inside, her blazer crisp, her face set with that quiet, lethal calm only a seasoned lawyer can wear. She stood and pulled me into a hug so tight it almost hurt. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered in my ear. I pressed the deed house into her hand, my fingers lingering on the edge like I was letting go of a lifeline. We filed everything in one long, decisive sweep: eviction papers, updated property tax filings, insurance renewals. Every tiny thread April thought she had control over was cut clean. The older woman behind the counter, her gray hair pinned in a tight bun, stamped each document slowly, her eyes darting up at me now and then, soft with something like sympathy. When she handed me back the final copies, she paused. "You okay, ma'am?" I met her eyes and felt my lips tremble for a moment. Then I nodded. "I will be," I said. She gave a small, almost reverent nod and pushed the papers forward. "Good luck." As we stepped out into the morning light, the courthouse steps felt steeper than I remembered, but each step down felt like peeling away another layer of April's hold on me. Helen squeezed my arm. "Now, Myrtle, now you have all the power." I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the city air, feeling the papers pressed solid and heavy against my ribs. I thought of April, still asleep in my house, smug and certain, believing I was out there somewhere cowering and lost. But today, I wasn't lost. Today, I was a woman who finally understood that quiet didn't mean powerless. And with every signed line, every notarized seal, I stitched another piece of myself back together. I could almost hear Robert's voice in the back of my mind, steady and proud. That's my girl. For the first time in decades, I believed him.
A week later, I stood outside my own front door. The locksmith glanced at me nervously, waiting for my signal. The sheriff stood a few steps behind, one hand on his belt, the other holding a folder with my paperwork, my armor. I looked up at the house, my house, and felt a surge of something so strong it nearly knocked me off balance. Rage, sorrow, relief, all tangled into one electric thread running down my spine. Through the front window, I saw April. She was barefoot, hair tangled, holding her phone like a lifeline. When her eyes met mine, they went wide and feral. She ran to the glass, pounding it with both fists, her mouth twisting into a scream I couldn't hear through the thick pain. I turned to the locksmith and nodded. My fingers trembled as I handed him the final eviction notice, signed and sealed just days ago. He took it with solemn care, as if I had given him a holy relic. April flung the door open, mascara smudged down her cheeks, rage pouring off her in waves. "Stop! You can't do this! You have no right!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. The sheriff stepped forward calmly, his presence solid as an oak. "Ma'am, you have 30 days to vacate. You are now officially trespassing." April looked at him, then at me, her mother, as if seeing me for the first time. In her eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. My breath stilled, my heart slowed, each beat echoing in my ears like a war drum. She lunged toward me, her voice rising into a pitiful wail. "Mom, please, you can't do this to me. I'm your daughter." I felt the old instinct surge, to hold her, to hush her, to fix it all. But I stayed still, rooted to the porch. The sheriff raised a gentle but firm hand, keeping her at a distance. I stepped forward, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through her hysteria. "You made your choice, April. You wanted freedom from me. Now you have it." She stumbled back, clutching the doorframe as if it could save her. Behind her, I saw the living room, the couch I saved for years to buy, the lamp she always hated, my mother's old rocking chair, pieces of me scattered and claimed without a thought. I looked at the sheriff and locksmith and nodded. "Proceed," I said, my voice steady, each syllable landing like a stone on a quiet pond. April crumbled to the floor, sobbing so violently it shook her shoulders. The sheriff stood watch, silent but resolute, as the locksmith began changing the locks. Each turn of the wrench was a final stitch, closing a wound. I stood there, gripping the deed in my pocket like a talisman, my spine straighter than it had been in years. In that moment, I felt something crack and fall away inside me, the last fragile piece of the mother I had been trying to be. When it was done, the locksmith stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. "All secure, ma'am," he said softly. I nodded, looking past April one last time, not at my daughter, but at a stranger who had chosen her greed over love. As I turned to leave the porch, I felt taller than I ever had in my entire life. The door closed behind me with a click that sounded to my ears like freedom. Behind me, I heard April's voice, a mixture of shrill rage and pitiful sobs. It rose and fell like a wounded animal's cry. Helen stood on the porch, unwavering as April scrambled back to her feet, clutching the folder. She flipped through the papers again, her fingers clumsy and frantic, her breath coming in shallow bursts.
Then she saw it. The line that spelled everything out. Sole owner, Mertling Carter. She dropped the papers, her hands going limp at her sides. The pages scattered across the porch, fluttering like broken wings. I watched her shoulders collapse inward. Her knees buckled. She slid down against the doorframe until she sat on the mat, the same mat that once promised her unconditional belonging. She started shaking her head as if she could physically shake away the reality closing in. "No, no, no," she muttered, each repetition smaller, more lost. Helen spoke then, her voice measured and steady. "It's over, April. You have no claim here. You never did." April turned her face upward, her makeup smeared into harsh streaks. "Please, Mom, just let me stay. I'll change. I'll do anything. Please don't leave me." For a split second, my heart lurched. A primal ache throbbed in my chest. The ghost of the mother I had been, the one who might have believed those words once. But the woman standing here now was different. She wasn't the same mother who paid away love with $1,000 checks, who accepted crumbs of affection in return for her soul. I took a step forward, my shadow falling across the path between us. "You loved what I gave you," I said, my voice calm, each word landing like a stone in a quiet lake. "You, not me. You sold every piece of trust I gave you for cash, for attention, for power. Now you can live with that choice." The morning of her move-out day came sooner than I expected. I stood at the edge of the garden, hands deep in the pockets of my cardigan as April dragged black garbage bags out to the curb. Each bag was stuffed with designer clothes, half-used makeup, shoes she'd bought with my money. She moved like a ghost, with no loud demands, no flippant insults, just a hollow, robotic rhythm. Her eyes met mine once as she struggled with the heavy suitcase. For a heartbeat, I saw a flash of something, the little girl who used to beg me to braid her hair before school, but it was gone as quickly as it came. She turned her gaze away, her jaw tight, her mouth pressed into a thin, furious line. When the rideshare car pulled up, she stood on the porch and looked around as if expecting someone to run after her, to plead with her, to beg her to stay. But I didn't move. She yanked open the car door, threw her bags inside, and then paused, her hand gripping the roof of the car, her knuckles white. She turned to me one last time, her voice sharp and low. "I hope you die alone," she spat, each word cracking through the quiet morning like a whip. My stomach clenched, but I didn't look away. I just nodded once, slow and steady, my face calm. I didn't reply, not because I didn't have words, but because none were needed. She climbed into the car, slammed the door shut, and as the car pulled away, I felt the earth shift beneath my feet, like a door finally slamming shut inside me. I stood there long after the car had disappeared around the corner, the wind tugging at the edges of my cardigan. Slowly, I turned to look at the roses by the fence, Robert's roses, the ones he planted after April was born, saying she'll always have a piece of beauty waiting for her here. I stepped closer, ran my fingertips over a blooming bud. The petals were soft, but edged with thorns, delicate and dangerous all at once. I felt a single tear slip down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I let it fall, let it dry in the morning sun. Behind me, the house stood quiet, still bruised from years of neglect, but it was mine again. I took a deep breath, the air filling me in a way it hadn't in decades. When I turned back toward the garden, I whispered so soft, even the roses had to lean in to hear. "You only miss me now that I said no." Then I stepped back inside, closing the door gently behind me. And for the first time in my life, I knew
that silence wasn't a punishment. It was peace.